Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Saddleback webinar this week. My name is Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. We will get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern Time with our webinar presentation for the day. But while you are signing in and joining us, please locate your control bar. That is at the bottom of your web browser window. And you will have three options there: the chat, the Q&A, and the live transcript. So if you would like to take advantage of subtitling, you want to go to that live transcript button, the closed caption, and then select show subtitles. The Q&A area is where you can drop any of your questions, either for Saddleback or our presenter today, Ms. Monica Washington. And the chat, of course, is how you can communicate with each other and share your thoughts as they pop into your head during the presentation today. Just please be aware that with Zoom webinar chat, you do have to select panelists and attendees before you send your chat so that everybody can see what it is you are sharing. So don't forget, select panelists and attendees. If you don't do that, only a few people here at Saddleback will see your comment. And as I like to say, that's just not as much fun. So please be sure that you select panelists and attendees. And while you're waiting, please follow us on Twitter. This is where you can find Saddleback and Monica Washington on Twitter. Let everybody know you're joining us for this great learning opportunity today. And if you happen to be catching the recording of this, go ahead to Twitter, find us, let us know you watched it, let us know what you thought. We always love to hear your feedback. So we'll get started in just a few minutes. Let's bring in Monica. How are you today, Monica?
I am good. Hi, everybody. I was watching all of the cities and states pop in. It's always fun to me to know where people are. So yeah, hi.
Yeah. So once again, as you're joining in, please select panelists and attendees. Just let everybody know what city you're joining us from. Hi, Joe in Waco, Texas. Nice to see you. Chicago. Let's see who else we have going on here. Pakistan. Nice to see you. Seattle. Excellent. Orange County, California. We've got a lot of California. South Alabama, Virginia, Indiana. Welcome. Maryland. Right about now is where I ask where my Canadian friends are. Anybody from Ontario? Anyone?
Anybody?
Not yet anyway. That's okay.
That's Phoenix from Edmonton.
We have what, Edmonton? Oh,
Uh,
there you are. Hi,
yeah.
Justine. Thank you. Diana from Guatemala, thank you for joining us. Great. Okay, and we understand these webinars are in the middle of the workday for many of you, so we appreciate you taking the time to come to the live broadcast, and those of you who are catching the recording, thank you as well. You're making that time, taking time to improve your professional practice, so much respect to all of you. Thank you so much. Okay, now Monica, I know you're going to be asking people when you start to present some more questions so they can utilize the chat. So I always like to do this at the beginning to make sure. Sometimes people need that reminder about the panelists and attendees thing in the chat because
Oh, absolutely.
Zoom, if you're listening, it would be great if you could change that default, but you know what, that's okay. We're going to be okay, everybody. We're going to survive. This is not a huge problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
The thought should be that you're talking to everyone. And if
I agree. The default.
Choose the panelists and choose panelists. Yeah.
I mean, teachers have enough to do. We don't need another thing to do. Select from a drop-down menu before we can chat. Come on.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Let me stop. I'm being silly. Okay. Hi, Judith. Nice to see you here. All right. Let me introduce Monica to you because we're going to get started in just a moment. So our topic today is using literature as a lens. A lot of us are teaching secondary students in ELA classes, and we know literature is a piece of that. So how do we use that literature to broaden students' perspectives? And here to talk to us about this is Monica Washington. If you don't know who Monica is, she is the Director of Inclusive and Responsive Educational Practice and an instructional coach for Better Lesson, supporting teachers and education leaders across the country as they make positive shifts in instruction and leadership. She is a decorated educator of 23 years and has received numerous honors and awards from a wide variety of organizations for her leadership, advocacy, and classroom instruction. In addition to instructional coaching, Monica supports teachers through workshops, speaking engagements, and blogging for Education Week and Education Post. Her post, 4 Things Great Principals Don't Do, was the most read and shared Education Week opinion post of 2017. So that's pretty exciting. She is a 2014 Texas Teacher of the Year and a 2015 Milk and Unsung Hero Fellow, and many others. Honestly, her awards are kind of too numerous to name for a webinar like
Don't
this.
worry about it. Yes.
Long story short, she knows what she's talking about, and she is here to share her thoughts and her wisdom with us today. So Monica, thank you so much for being here. Welcome everybody. I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Liz. And what that says to me is that formal introduction, I need to just chop that bad boy in half, because as you said, I am here with my people who are also really passionate about this. So thank you to those of you who are dropping hellos and cities and states in the chat. I really appreciate that. And thank you, as Liz said, you are joining us probably from the middle of your workday. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you're watching the recording, hi, thank you for taking the time to carve out time to watch the recording. So I'm going to hop on in here so we can use our hour and share my screen. See here if it'll let me. Yes, it will. Let's do it. All right. So as Liz just said, we are talking today about literature as a lens. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Using text to broaden perspectives, our students' perspectives. And I would love to know, I know we dropped our states, our cities, our countries in the chat. I would love to know also what your role is. So are you librarians, ELA, reading teachers, instructional coaches? You can drop your grade level that you primarily support. I would just love to just take a few seconds so that we can, since we're not all in the same physical space, we can look around the chat as our space and see who else is in the room with us. So I love to just take a minute to do that. Let's see who we have. Esau, chairperson. Yes, ELL. Hi, Mary. Cynthia, instructional coach. Yes. Hi from Ohio, Becca. Elementary literacy specialist, Teresa. Pre-K. Woo, yes. Thank you. K-12 ESL coordinator, Graham. Megan, Linda's ESL. Awesome. Librarian. Shout out to all the librarians, library assistants, ELD coaches. Awesome. Thank you all. We'll take a few more seconds to drop this, our roles in here. Consultant, Judith is English learner, teacher training. We need that. Ecuador, Vivian, thank you for joining. Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. Okay, preschool, Gabriella, thank you for doing that. And Kathy is the librarian. So keep dropping those. I'll move the chat over now and we'll go ahead and dive in. Thank you for being here with me today. Okay, so as we think about diversifying our classroom text, thinking about helping students broaden their perspectives, what feels like a barrier in that work? When you think about diversifying either your classroom text, a lot of you are in the library, or diversifying your library text, what feels like a barrier? You can drop one thing in the chat or several things in the chat, but what feels kind of sticky about that for you? I'd love to know your thoughts around that. Funding, Mary says, yes. The kids say they don't like to read, absolutely. What else? And I have jotted down some ideas of what I have found to be barriers in my career, and we'll see if we have some of the same answers. I'm sure we will. Budget, again, Michelle says, yes. The time to alter text for student reading levels. Representation, yes. Materials at a lower cognitive load. Age appropriate, limited diverse resources. That's real. Yes. Teachers are afraid they will upset a student or a parent with some of the text. Yes, Angie. Differentiation, Angelica says. Yes, thank you. Couple more, I'll pause. Make sure there's time for anybody who wanted to share. Feeling like we're still telling a single story with the novel teachers chose. Yes, and if you have not seen that TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, please check it out. Discomfort and taking risks. Absolutely. Thank you all so much. So we'll talk, and you can still put your ideas in the chat, but we'll talk a little bit about what some of those barriers are. And I can share a little bit about how I have gotten over or around or through some of those barriers. Sometimes it's just about kicking down something, and sometimes it's about being really skillful and tactful and going around things. Megan says local community already pushing against equity work. Yes, I just had this discussion with a friend yesterday. The pushback is real. It absolutely is. And it's heartbreaking for those of us who do this work. So thank you all for still pushing forward in the face of those barriers you named, or barriers you didn't name, but you're just thinking about, right? So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do with this next, let's see, 54-ish minutes together. So I want to do three things. I want us to talk about, and we've already started talking about, some of the potential challenges that might exist. And then I'll share some hacks, let you all share some hacks, how you've worked around some of those barriers and challenges. And then we want to review some strategies and examples for diversifying literature. I'll share some classroom examples, and I also have a video clip where we'll visit a class and listen to students talk about some of the benefits of having diverse literature in their class. And then I created a template that you'll get in the resources at the end that can be a guide for you as you think about how you can diversify the literature in your libraries and in your classrooms. And I just left a note there for you that if we were together and we had a couple of hours, we would take some time, maybe even in groups, to practice with the template today, but you'll definitely walk away with it. And I would love for you to take it, sit with your team members, your grade level, or just by yourself, and think about the ways in which you can do some diversification. So that's what we hope to do. And so why, right? So when we think about, I've talked to leaders and I've talked to teachers who sometimes have a very narrow view about what we're doing or what we're talking about when we say diversifying text. A lot of times pushback that I've heard is that, well, are we just talking about race? Are we just talking about getting more books on the shelves that have students of color? And like, yes, that's a part of it. And we don't do, when I say we, I mean in our profession, in our country, we don't do a very good job there with representation, as someone said in the chat, right? So yes, that's a part of it, but we're talking about so many more aspects of students' identity that we're trying to have represented by our literature that we teach, right? So we're talking, yes, race, but culture, ability, disability, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, age. We're talking about all of these different aspects of our students' identities and trying to figure out ways in which we can fill in gaps that are in our curriculum. So just wanted to say that I feel like I have that conversation at least like once or twice a month with the leaders. It's like, what, just buy more books with students of color? And as one of you said in the chat, sometimes it's even hard to find where those resources are. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. All right. So, and Brian is asking about handouts. I'm going to give you my template. Yes, as a handout, you'll have it to take with you. So thank you for asking. So here are some notes that I just jotted down for barriers to diversifying text. So I don't think I remember anyone saying anything about time, but what I have experienced and also what I've heard is that, oh, wow, it feels really time consuming to do that. I think someone did mention that, right? So being able to really differentiate it and really do with a book or a reading what you want to do. It feels like a whole other job to have. And there is a pressure that teachers feel, librarians feel it too, that there are these sets of standards that we have and we're trying to hit those. And anything outside of that sometimes feels like too much and you don't have time. Teachers have said all the time, like, I have this many standards and I have to cover those. And if I bring in anything outside of what we already have to read, how on earth do I get to it all? There is, I think someone mentioned about aligning to subject or grade levels, making sure something is grade level appropriate, absolutely. And lacking just some good methods for how to do it. And I'll say too, like that to me also ties back to time. Sometimes as English department chair, we would sit down as a department and try to, as much as we possibly could, share ideas. But there wasn't always time to share our how. Like, I may have a really good how that I do something, and someone down the hall has another good how, but we never get to talk to each other. So we end up doing the thing that becomes comfortable for us, and we do that over and over. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a state of what we deal with as educators. Sometimes there's pushback from colleagues. I heard someone, or not heard, I didn't hear your voice, but I saw in the chat, someone mentioned pushback from families, for sure, and students themselves. I didn't list that, but I should. But also pushback from colleagues. I've been told, listen, just do the thing, teach the standards, send them home. When we don't have time to do all that, why are we doing all this extra stuff? Monica, you are so extra, right? And in order to really meet my students' needs, I have to be extra. We all have to be. And sometimes there's that pushback from administration where I have tried to get a book through, and it seemed as though that was not going to be I wasn't going to be successful at it, because there was a set of books that we've always taught every year in that grade level, and nobody wanted to budge from it. So I've done a few things to sort of work around that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So I feel like, take our barriers and challenges and put them on the shelf for a little bit. And what's a positive to me is that as ELA teachers, as reading teachers, as librarians, to me, I always feel like we are travel agents. We have students who come to us, and perhaps in my case, I've had students who never had left the neighborhood. They've never left the neighborhood before. And to go outside of the neighborhood, even in the same city, feels like an adventure. And to think about what books can do for students really blows me away, because it even broadens their horizons even further than what we can have in our own like physical city, right? So I love Mark Twain, and I love this quote by him. He says, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. And perhaps we don't have the means to travel, and we are still in a pandemic, right? We probably, all of us, I know I haven't been on a plane in a really long time. Most of us have been in one spot for a while, but if we have books, we do feel like we can travel. And so I always like to look at myself as a travel agent of sorts. All right. Yes, I love that quote too. All right. And so I know I'm with my people who live in this world. And so this is not new to you. You live in the world of windows and mirrors and windows all the time. But in case there's someone joining who doesn't know what this metaphor is, Rudine Sims Bishop is a librarian. She's retired now. She is who I call her the mother of the windows and mirrors metaphor. And she basically said that we are doing a good job for our students if we are providing them a balance of mirrors and windows. So what we teach, what we read with them should give them a glimpse into something that is familiar to them. They're looking in the mirror like, oh, yes, that thing that's happening with that character, I've experienced that. I know about that. I live in this type of place. This is familiar to me, and it's affirming for me. That's a mirror for me. However, we also have to give students windows as well. What is it that you don't know much about? What is a place you've never visited? What is an experience you've never had? And so the literature is expanding their perspective by then giving them something else to look at. They're looking through to something that's unfamiliar to them, and they're learning about it. And so if we are only giving our students mirrors, we're doing a disservice to them. If we're only giving them windows, we're doing a disservice to them, because we're not affirming students who only have windows, and we're not challenging students from broadening their perspectives when we only give them mirrors. And so I love the concept, and I think about it a lot when I am trying to help a teacher figure out sort of a unit and figuring out little pieces, short pieces, longer pieces to read. I think about that. Who are your students? How well do you know your students? Have we spent time getting to know our students? And then how are we providing windows and mirrors? I'll say a word of caution too about that. I've sometimes seen this go really badly when there is an assumption. So if a teacher assumes, you know what, this student lives in this neighborhood and he probably would love this book about gangs, or he would probably love this book about this. And if that's an assumption that's not based on a conversation with the student, a survey with from the student, then we are using bias then and our own prejudice to determine what a student's mirror is. So we have to, as much as possible, hear from our students, and they will reveal to us what their mirrors are and what their windows are. So that's just my word of caution about just us assuming as educators that we know. And so this graphic, these two graphics, this one is a little bit clearer. I'm not sure why the 2015 one came out a little bit blurry, but hopefully you can still see those numbers. This is really telling. And Cooperative Children's Book Center, every few years, they will compile all of the books that have been published. They'll look at publishing statistics, I can't talk today, and they will then determine what percentage of characters in the books are white, are animals, are African American, Asian, Latinx, and American Indian. And they do a graphic based on what they found. So many of you in this room may have already seen this, but 2015, they did this study. 2018, they did this study, and I think they are about to, I hope, do it again for 2021. But if you look at 2015, look over here at the white student. This means that when it comes to children's books, in 2015, 73.3% of the characters were white children. That's a whole lot of mirrors, a whole lot of mirrors. And so you can see how big this mirror is. Is it bad that that student can look at most of his literature and see himself? Absolutely not. But he's probably not seeing much of anything else but himself. And that therein lies the problem. 12.5, animals, trucks, trains, 7.6% Black, 3.3% Asian, 2.4% Latinx, and 0.9% American Indian. And as you can see, it's kind of blurry, but every time that percentage drops, the size of the mirror gets smaller and smaller and smaller. They can barely see themselves. So looking at 2018, we had the number go down, it decreased for white students to 50%. Animals increased from 12.5 to 27%. African American, 10%, Asian, 7%, Latinx, 5%, and American Indians moved up to 1%. So while we did decrease the number of white characters in children's books, where did that number go? Just more animals. So we didn't even spread that across other representations of human beings. We had more animals. So that tells us that we have work to do. And so we all are here because we believe in this work. And I thank you so much for doing it. All right, so I want us to take a quick visit to a classroom and just listen to what students have to say about their experiences with diverse literature. And one of the things that I say all the time is, if we listen, they will teach. Just, I will throw back to that movie. But if we listen to students, they'll teach us what we need to know as educators. And so I felt like this video, these students don't know me and they don't know you, but they're speaking exactly what we all believe in. So I'm going to play it. It's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And as you listen, think about windows and mirrors and think about the barriers that we just listed. And then I'll ask you a question and we can drop a few things in the chat. Oh, no, go back. There we go.
We were reading Fences by August Wilson. And it was just that whole analyzing how the father's actions and how his relationship influenced everything that had happened to Corey, his son. So, we just really got to think about, hey, like, how did our relationship with our fathers or any other figure in our life as important as a father, how did that affect us and who we became in the future? And how our persistence and our ambitions, how did that come to be?
All these fictional works
every single character has some trait that's like basically are like the essence of human nature. And once you figure that out, it's really easy to connect them because it's like they have the same trait that you have, even though sometimes you don't show it because you're like, in a way, I'm somewhat like them. And I would probably do something like that too if I was in a situation.
What this class has done for me was just open my mind to the possibilities of what the world is doing or changing around me. And I just feel like social and academics just come together as one. I just take what I learned through this class and apply it to everyday situations now.
This class changed what morals and ethics that I thought was wrong and right. There was this book that we read that really changed how I thought. It was called Ruined by Lynn Nottage. And the main character, she was running a brothel, which when I first started, I was like, why is she doing that? Like she's reinforcing the patriarchy. But as I read it, like she was doing the right thing because that was her way of undermining the patriarchy and giving these women a safe place to stay in. Made me open my eyes more to the world. I think it made me a stronger person. Yeah, voicing my opinions, but also understanding why people do what they do, because before I just know they're wrong, like why would they do that? But you need to understand their perspective too.
I find myself outside the class always talking about them. And like, what would you do in that position? And just like thoroughly explaining what we were reading. And even outside the class, I continued to ponder and just like, oh, I could have said that, or oh, this was like a great idea. But it's always outside of the classroom.
Okay, so as I pause this video, drop in the chat, what do you notice or wonder, or what resonates with you when you think about what you're hearing those students say? Let me open up the chat again. What thoughts do you have from listening to those students share their experiences? Their engagement, yes, validation they're getting from their books. Making connections, shifting their existing perspectives. I absolutely heard that as well, Becca. Yes. Viewpoint changes from what they read, for sure. Yes. I love the one student too who said social and academics sort of come together. They're connecting, they're engaged. Absolutely. I like the idea of worlds opening up based on what they've read, Mary says, for sure. Understanding why people do or think what they do or think. Yes, Angie. Simple concept. The literature is important because we can try to understand why people do what they do. Aranda, I hope I said it correctly. Names are important. Thank you. I'll wait for one more to drop in here. Then we'll go forward. But you think exactly the way that I think about this. I was like, oh my gosh, they can do this workshop for teachers. All righty, thank you so much. So just keep ideas coming in the chat. But as I taught first starting in middle school and then in high school, one thing that I tried to do once I got better at it, because I wasn't always the best at this, but I started looking at literature and teaching literature as painting a picture. And that always helped me when I planned my lessons or when I planned my units. And so what I mean by that is I finally realized, I don't know what year it was, maybe it was like 10 years in, but that literature is speaking always to my students. Literature is telling students what is important and who is important. And it's also telling my students who is not important and who is, what is not important and what I'm just going all over the place, the opposite. It's telling my students what's important, who's important, and who's not, right? So I think that when I'm trying to paint those pictures for them, I'm looking for those gaps. And I'm seeing and I'm asking myself, let me see in this text, what is the thing that it is painting for my students? What is the picture? What voices are represented? What voices are not represented? And so when we diversify our text, we're giving students that fuller picture, that more complete picture of reality. And the book itself is probably doing a good job, but it's a slice. of a picture. And so I'm always trying to think about what pieces I need to put with what I am teaching to make that picture come to life for my students. Sorry about getting tongue-tied. It's been a day. So I fill in pictures and I ask myself, someone mentioned it takes time, and it took me some practice to get used to doing this, right? So figuring out what content is missing. Is there something about what I'm teaching that as I read it as a teacher, I'm like, oh, but they didn't touch on this. Sometimes content isn't missing, but if there is content missing, I want to know about that and think about that. What voices have been left out? Are girls marginalized in the book? And how can I bring in more female voices if that's the case? And so is there a bigger picture that students need to see? So that book itself, whether it's a book in pre-K, whether it is a book at middle school or high school, it is zoomed into one setting, a set of characters, and a set of experiences. It is very much zoomed in. So what I'm trying to do is to zoom out and see what else I can share. And so what do? Time is a problem. And trying to get through all of the ELA objectives, especially in Texas, oh my gosh, we have way too many. I can't put another book or a novel beside this novel and then use this novel and teach 6 or 7 novels at the same time to have every student read that. Now, if we're doing like literature circles, that's different. But if every student has to read 8 books just to get a full picture, then that's too much and we don't have time for that. So I pull in smaller pieces. So is there a song that I can use? So figure out what is actually in this book or what's missing. So Google just a song that's about blah, blah. If I'm teaching middle school or if I'm teaching high school, can I substitute something for a children's book? Can I bring in a children's book? My 11th graders almost lost their minds when I went to the library and got a big stack of children's books. And they were like, oh man, I know you're not gonna read children's books to us. And I did, and they loved it. But they filled in some gaps that we needed in the novel that we were reading. Are there short articles that can bring out some current events that are about what's actually in the text that you're reading? Can you just say, I'm going to bring in this picture and put this picture on the wall and have them discuss what's happening in the picture and how does it relate or not relate to what we're reading? Or are there little quick podcasts? Let them listen to either a writer talking about what they've written or just something about the setting, the time period that you can bring in that can also supplement. So I always think about what shorter pieces I can use to put around the longer thing that can help build out my picture. And I see some things in the chat and I want to see, yes, previous perspectives talking about the video. Yes, thank you all so much. And so just an example from my classroom, and then I'll show you how I sort of walk through the tool that I created, which is basically my process in my brain on a sheet of paper. But at our school, every single 11th grader must read The Great Gatsby. They're actually reading it right now. And it has been read for, I don't know, our school has been there since 1955, probably since 1955, every 11th grader at Texas High School has read The Great Gatsby. I love the book, but it does not tell the whole picture. It doesn't give the full story. So if I only were to teach The Great Gatsby and that's it at this time of the school year, I always think, what is this telling my students? What is the picture that my students are seeing from The Great Gatsby? And I can do this with any book. And I did this with all the books, just really quickly, not like, let's take 2 weeks to figure it out, but just in a few minutes, what is it telling my students? So it told my students by itself as a standalone book that everyone in the 1920s was a rich person and everyone was probably white. I had students ask me, Miss Washington, were there Black people in the 20s? I was like, yes, they just were not in this book, right? And perhaps it told them that life was a party. There were no hard times really, besides Jay trying to get the girl. There weren't very many issues or struggles. And again, there were not very many people of color. Maybe they would get that. And maybe they would even think that all great writers were men and were white men, if that's all I ever taught. And so what I had to do was, if that is a book that I cannot pull off my shelf and say, I'm going to teach something totally different. If I don't have the freedom to say, this year I won't read The Great Gatsby, then how do I create that bigger picture? So then what I did was I thought, what else was being written in the 1920s? Who else is writing in the 1920s? Just do a quick Google search and you'll see other things. You'll get art from the 1920s. You'll get all of these other things that you can wrap around the book. So I would bring in some poems from Langston Hughes and other Harlem Renaissance poets because they are writing from a perspective that does not exist in The Great Gatsby. Zora Neale Hurston has these little short folk tales and short stories that we could also pull around the book. I used magazine articles that really highlighted some current events of the time. So we would read a passage about, all of the glory of Jay Gatsby's mansion. And then I will follow that up by just saying a poem from Langston Hughes, Ballad of the Landlord. He is my absolute favorite poet. But Ballad of the Landlord goes, landlord, landlord, my roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it way last week? Landlord, landlord, these steps is broken down. When you come up yourself, it's a wonder you don't fall down. $10 you say I owe you. $10 you say it's due. Well, that's $10 more than I'll pay you till you fix this house up new. What? You're gonna get eviction orders. You're gonna turn off my heat. You're gonna take my furniture and throw it in the street? You're talking high and mighty. Talk on till you get through. You ain't gonna be able to say a word if I land this fist on you. Police, police, come and get this man. He's trying to ruin the government and overturn the land. Copper's whistle, patrol bill, arrest, precinct station, iron cell, headlines in press. Man threatens landlord, tenant held no bail. Judge gives Negro 90 days in county jail. So we would put those side by side and talk about the experiences of both of those characters, where they lived, and show and talk really about what it says about life for a lot of people in the 1920s, not just rich, fun, let's go shake and party, put on our flapper dress, but there are people who were struggling of all races in the 1920s. And so that would open up a lot of really great discussions, also about punishment too, and how we get away with things or we don't get away with things because of our positions and power dynamics and all of those things. So I wasn't intending to do that poem, but I wanted to just share that with you. I never know if I want to say a poem or not, but they just kind of come up. Some of you know, you feel me, I know. Yes, Victor, check it out. It is awesome. I love it. All right. So I hear this, but all my students are the same. Like I teach all Black students. So I don't really understand why I need to think about, windows and mirrors. I just need to give them books with people who look like them. That's great, but, right? Or I hear, but all my students are white. I actually heard that Monday of this week, but all my students are white. So we don't really have that issue of having to have, other diverse literature. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, we absolutely do. Because again, go back to this visual, even if all my students are Black, or I think that they are, right? Or even if all my students are white, they still have all these other aspects of their identity that we can explore through literature. So, and we don't know that if we walk into a room of all white students, that they have the same exact experience and background. They don't. And we don't know if we walk into a room of all Black students that they have the same experiences, that they have the same lifestyles, socioeconomic status. We don't. And so we still diversify, even when the students in front of us look quite homogenous. They still need windows. They still have to look out, even if they are, to us and our eyes, all the same. I'm looking at the chat. Yes, okay, gotcha. Talking about the certificates. All right, so I wanted to just share some examples of how we can do this when we actually, let me go back and let me show you, walk you through the template before I tell you about this. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this, and if you can't, Liz will let me know. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. So this is the template that you are going to get, and it just represents my brain, my process of trying to do this as much as I possibly could. And there often, as we said before, isn't time to really teach long pieces at the same time. And there sometimes isn't the time even to plan. So I don't know how many of you do this, but I plan in the car in my head as I'm driving home. I'll see a sign and I'm like, oh, they gave me an idea. So just always thinking about what I'm about to read with students. And I'll see a commercial and bring in commercials. When I was teaching, what was the book? The Awakening, Kate Chopin. And then I also was trying to, it was our women's literature unit. And I taught I Want a Wife by Judy Brady. If you haven't read that, it's a must read. I Want a Wife, Judy Brady. And had those two pieces side by side, but I also wanted some visuals. So I went and looked up all of these old Folgers commercials that are very sexist, and brought those in as well. So we watched commercials, we read I Want a Wife, and we read pieces of The Awakening, just talked about the female experience that each of those pieces of text, whether it was media or the text, presented. So it could be a commercial that you see, right? It could be anything. So what I do is I think about what's the thing that I have to teach. And I'll just pause for a second and say, if you have freedom to pick any book that you want in your school or in your library, you don't need my process at all, because you can just buy a bunch of diverse books. But this is my attempt at, if you have no control or no power over what you teach or what you read, or you have limited, I'll say limited power. Like I can't take away The Great Gatsby. It's going to be taught, right? So how can I build out the experience for my students and have them see other perspectives? So I start with the text. So here it would be The Great Gatsby or whatever it is that we're teaching. And then I want to just make myself a bulleted list. What are themes that are taught by this book? We sort of walked through it on the slide before. What are concepts, right? So we're talking about the American dream, love, loss, identity, all of these different things that we find in that text. So I'll just make some bullets. And then after I know exactly what the text is painting for me, then I want to consider the limitations of that text. So what are the limitations of the text, right? So are there voices that are not represented, experiences like me bringing in Langston Hughes that are not represented, other perspectives that are not represented? And then I would just make bullets again, like, oh, what's left out? Oh, they don't get to know about this, that, or that. And then my next step is to think about how we can bring in other media to fill these gaps that we identified. And I left a note on here for you that I know we as literaries, we think a lot about the canon and keeping canonized texts at the center of reading. And this is not what this is meant to do. This is not meant to say, keep the canon reads at the center and just bring in other people, other books or other texts in a marginalized way. This is in case you cannot change your curriculum, your literary curriculum, your choices, but you still want to provide your students with some richer literary experiences. But by all means, when you can switch it up and buy other things, do it. So this is what this process is. So I've identified themes, limitations, and then I think, all right, what other little short books are there? Maybe it's a children's book, like I've brought in to my high schoolers. Maybe it's a short story that's a couple of pages. Maybe it's poetry. Maybe it's articles. Maybe it's podcasts. I mentioned commercials, other videos that we can bring in. And then I identify those. So I want to use this Folgers commercial. I want to use I Want a Wife. And I want to use some excerpts from Good Housekeeping manual or the Good Housekeeping magazine that had all of these. Make sure you take care of your husband, fix his dinner, take care of his friends. Maybe it's something like that. So what is that potential theme? What's the potential themes that are coming from that text and concepts? And I would do bullet, 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 bullet. So now I know I want to make sure that what is coming out of these additional texts are what I identified up here as a limitation. So, and it sounds like a long process, but it literally only takes a few minutes. And if you have a team, that's the end of the document. If you have a team where you all can, work together and say, here are all the things that we're teaching this school year. Let's everybody take 1 or 2 texts and sort of do this diversification process and then make the list. Put it all on one document or a Padlet or something so that you don't have to do them all by yourself. Share as much as we possibly can. And let me see what's in the test. Sharing a planet to what? Yes. Okay. Awesome. Happy to give this to you all. I'm gonna hop back over here to slides. All right. So other examples of how this can work, elementary, middle, or high. But you can Google any children's story, or you can say children's videos about perspectives, and 1,000 things will come up. Many of them really short, because if we're thinking about them for younger students, they are going to be short. And that's how I found this video. I just Googled videos about new perspectives, children, right? And so I don't know how many of you have ever read Sometimes You're a Caterpillar, but it's such a cute little book. The text for the story is available if you Google text for Sometimes You're a Caterpillar. This works in kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, and you can just do something different with it each time. And my guiding question for this book, for whatever age level, really, we can just change the wording, is sort of, what can we do in our school, or what can we do in our classroom to help people understand differences and new perspectives? So if you haven't read the story, we probably have time, really. I think we do. You may have time. I'm going to still show it. I didn't think I would, but I'm going to. It's about 3 minutes long. So a question here about what can we do in our classroom? What can we do in our school to help students understand, or people understand differences and new perspectives? Or we can think about friendship. If it's a second grader, what does this story teach us about friendship? So I'll show that video here in just a second. But there also is the story Red. I don't know how many of you have read this one. It's by Michael Hall. And it is about a crayon who has red paper, but every time he colors, it comes out blue. And everybody keeps telling him that you should not be coloring blue. You are a red crayon, so color in red. And he's trying, he feels left out, he doesn't fit in. Here he is, blue, but red on the outside. And so that's awesome for any grade level to just kick off a whole discussion with your middle schoolers, your high schoolers, your elementary students about judging other people or being a unique individual. And I think I've seen students have some really profound conversations that just started with a 3-minute video clip from a children's book. So if you haven't read that one, check that one out as well. Thank you, Liz, for dropping that. All right, so I'm going to show this one, and then I'm going to give you some questions that you can use in your class after you have done this process of finding these other pieces of literature. You've done this process of sort of filling in the gaps, painting full pictures, and you are at the place of discussing with your students, because that's what we're talking about today, is expanding perspectives and having them see things that perhaps they didn't see before. So I have some guiding questions that I'll leave you with, but we have time, doing really well on time. So I'll show you this 3-minute clip, and then we'll end with the guiding questions and a little Q&A. So let's see. Sometimes You're a Caterpillar. If I can get it to. Oops, sorry, here we go.
In the garden, there's a caterpillar and a snail, and they're basically best friends. They hang out 24/7. They do dinner, movie nights, crafts. Oh, and they're like really into cosplay on top of like whatever else caterpillars and snails do, like eat leaves or something. Anyways, one day they're on their way to a party that's right outside the garden, and they have to go through the fence to get there. So the caterpillar goes right through, but the snail is stuck. Her shell is just too big and it won't fit under the wire. So she's like, crap, I can't get through. Maybe like, can you lift up the wire, or maybe we can build a little bridge or something? And the caterpillar's like, dude, just go under. But she can't. There's just no way that the shell is gonna fit. And the caterpillar's like, go under, come on, we're gonna be late, and I'm trying to hook up with that super cute ladybug. but it's not happening. The shell will not fit under the wire. And at this point, Snail's getting kind of frustrated because it's not like she doesn't want to go to the party, but for some reason, Caterpillar just isn't getting it. Yeah, it's not that easy for me. I just can't crawl under the fence like you can, so I would really appreciate your help here. Maybe we can like go a different way, and this just like sets the Caterpillar off. What the heck? Just because I can crawl under stuff doesn't mean that I have it easy. Do you even know what it's like to have 16 feet? You don't, because finding shoes is a complete nightmare. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not saying you have it easy. I'm just saying I can't go under the fence because of my shell. That's it. I have a shell and you don't. And there's some stuff that's easier for you that's harder for me. Just like I don't know jack about finding shoes because I don't have feet. Caterpillar thinks about this for a second and realizes the snail is right. I mean, he's never had to think about shells or slimy trails, and that's a privilege that the snail has never had because she has to think about that stuff all the time. That's part of being a snail. And it's kind of like that for everyone, right? I mean, we all have our own struggles and challenges, and some of them are small and some of them are huge and really unfair and beyond our control. And a lot of the time, it can be hard to see what someone else deals with because you've never been in their shoes or shell. Like maybe you're gay or trans, have a disability or different religion, or of course, the obvious one, you're a member of a different race. I don't know what it's like to be you, and you don't know what it's like to be me. So it's really important to stop and try and see the other side so we can help each other overcome those obstacles together. It's like sometimes you're the snail and sometimes you're the caterpillar. Oh yeah, okay, so then the snail and the caterpillar figured out that if they went to the other side of the garden, they could get through a little break in the fence. And while it took a little longer to get to the party, they did the trip together, which is what made it so great. So they got to the party, the caterpillar hooked up with the ladybug, snail taught everyone how to do the wobble, and the party was everything. The end. This video was illustrated by the very...
Okay, so using the chat, what could you do with that? Let me go back to slides here. It won't let me. Let's see what is happening.
talented and lovely Cat Black.
Okay, there we go. So what could you do with that with your students as far as discussion goes? I have these questions up here. What else could you possibly talk about? And I'm going to open up the chat. You can teach diversity, Linda says, absolutely. What else? You can teach empathy, Michelle says. Yes. And I will tell you, older kids love children's books, but they won't admit it. You can start a conversation about differences and perspectives, Liz says. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. So adults, right, can have some conversations using this one as a starter. I love that, Mary, because that's what I thought about too. It's a really great way to think about privilege and bias. Judith says for English learners, it helps to have a discussion about cultural differences, even foods, distance when speaking, eye contact. Yes. Yes, show it to your cousin, Mary. Joe says perspective taking and empathy. Patricia, thank you. Me too. I like it. It's really cute. Becca, teaching awareness. Older kids do love them. Yes. It's calming. Fairness of accommodating differences. Yes. Thank you so much. So just so much we can do with just a quick Google search with whatever we're teaching, just videos about, and then see what comes up. And I found the best things that way. And I just make myself a little catalog and label them. And so when I get to something that I'm teaching that's about that theme or that topic, I don't have to reinvent the wheel or go back and search again because I've already found it before. Anna says power of cooperative thinking. Yes, learn how to listen, be an ally. Natalia, Judith, understanding challenges for others that you don't have. Absolutely. See, you all are the best. Okay, so, don't start again. Let's talk about, I won't show red, but I highly recommend you taking a look at that one when you get a chance. Trying to go forward. There we go. So after we have allowed students to really think and have some windows, also have some mirrors, they need space to discuss and reflect and think about what they just saw, think about how their perspectives have shifted, and work on articulating what has shifted in their thinking, right? So sometimes I would do something like just pick a character who shares a personality trait or a characteristic with you. What about that character do you identify with and why? Just a really little quick thing, or we can talk verbally. Just pick one of the characters you identify with. And maybe you don't identify with everything about the character, but there's a trait, there's something about that character and you're like, yeah, I do that too. And students will write. So again, like that's a little bit of a mirror, something that is reflective of their own experience or their own personality trait. Or choose a character who you think lacks common personality traits or characteristics with you. And in what ways have you and the character been impacted by your unique backgrounds and experiences, right? So thinking about the caterpillar and the snail, they have different backgrounds, experiences, they're different, right? So pick a character and talk about you are this way and you're like, I don't see eye to eye. If I knew this character in real life, I wouldn't probably see eye to eye. But think about what about that character is coming from background. What is the experience of that character that you think has impacted what we're seeing in the book? And then do the same for them. So they're making those connections. And then in what way or ways did this reading challenge or affirm a perspective you had before reading? So for younger students, I would say, what's something that you now agree with that you didn't agree with before? What's something that you now don't believe that you didn't believe, that you once believed, right? So what's different now after you read whatever it is that we read? And these sometimes are round circle discussions, and sometimes they're, I always give students a chance to sit with it by yourself first. So sit with it alone and write about it. And that piece of paper on which they've written becomes sort of like a safety net. And students who normally are afraid to share, afraid to talk, by having their thoughts out on paper first, they're more confident when we do sit in a circle and we share. So I always like to give them time to sit with it by themselves and really reflect on what they just read and see what those challenges are. So I'll pause and see another resource, Barbara, Float by Pixar. Oh yes, I don't know that one and I'm going to look it up. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so come to the end, final thoughts. I want to give space. We have about 7-ish minutes for any Q&A or other resources that you all have, of, and that you like to share. And for those of you who are watching the video, we can, if there are, as we just had that really great resource, Float, I'll call out the name. Float is Pixar, for those of you who are watching the video and you cannot see the chat. Thank you, Vera. I appreciate it. So I will stop sharing my screen. There is my email address and my Twitter. Thank you all so much for doing this work and thinking about ways in which you can bring in some other perspectives. I will say, let me go back to it. Boom, let's pull these back up because I just thought of something. Okay, so these barriers, I want to come back to this. So be thinking of your question, drop it in the chat, or, oh, that's all, we can't. Oh, you can't see the quote. Can't see the quote, Jana says. Not sure. But I wanted to say one way that I've gotten around some of these barriers when it comes to pushback from administration. One thing that I've been really successful at doing is tying what I'm trying to teach to our mission and our vision. So if we're saying we value diversity and we believe that all students are unique and we value that about our students, and I'm trying to bring in a diverse perspective, but I'm getting pushback, I will often say, this is very much in line with what we all have posted on our classroom walls that we believe in about how we want students to see themselves. This book or this reading allows my students to do exactly what we're calling out in our mission, right? So it's like, okay. But I sometimes have used that. And as far as the budget piece, there are so many different, as I said before, free things or free resources that are out there, whether they are videos and podcasts. But also that question that someone had about just knowing what resources are there, because that's time consuming. There are so many different organizations that compile really great reads, and I wish I had the website that I'm thinking of. But if you Google diverse literature for middle schoolers, you'll get a whole bunch of different sites that come up. Start clicking through those. Why can I think of the site that I really want to share with you? If I think of it, I'll give it to Liz so she can share it with you. But there are websites out there. There are people like us who don't mind sharing what they already have found and created, and it's there. There are grade specific, grade appropriate titles for you to just look at and see if you can bring those in. And some of them are really short. So this work is done. I also helped InStory, the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. We put out a book list a few years ago, so I can share that one as well. There have been a lot of books that have been written since we put together our book list, but it can be a start. But Google it, and I'm going to think of that website that I'm thinking about and share it with Liz so you can get it in your resources. A Mighty Girl, Mary says. Oh, sorry, that's what you meant. Fixing Justice, Not Kids. That was it. Yes, lots of good books. A Mighty Girl. I'm going to go there too. Thank you, Judith. That's a website I'm thinking. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We only
Okay.
have a few minutes.
I just hopped back on here because I'm going to, before we get into Q&A, I want to share what we have coming up next week, and definitely have some questions that I need to share with you. So next week, we have Beth Skelton joining us to talk about working with long-term English learners. This has been a pretty frequent request from our audience. So Beth Skelton is here to discuss just the basics, the ABCs of working with long-term English learners, and help troubleshoot some of those challenges we encounter with our long-term ELs. So please register on our website, or you can wait until you receive the email prompting you to register. We also have our on-demand webinar for our new Saddleback digital platform that is available on our YouTube channel. So if you need more information on that, you can reach out to me or check out our on-demand webinar that has a nice overview of the platform for you. All right, let's jump into some questions here. I see, hold on, the chat is lighting up here. I want to make sure I'm not. Okay, these are people putting in names of resources, right? I wanted to ask,
Yes.
because this is a question that came in as a pre-webinar question, so it came in with the registrations. And this is for everybody out there. Sometimes we need to come together and share what we know and help with resources. But we have quite a few international attendees of these webinars. And one of the questions that came up was, you know, a lot of the book lists are set in the United States, and it gives you various perspectives from various groups within the United States. Is there something similar for different regions of the globe? So if I'm teaching on another continent or in another country, is there a book list out there that highlights these different perspectives and these different texts from an international perspective? And, you know, a quick cursory Google search pulled up a couple of lists that were pretty good, but we're always looking for more. So if you're out there and you know of a great list, or you use a great list for international, you know, books in other languages, or books featuring characters from different places on the globe, please feel free to share that with us. And Monica, if anything comes to mind, definitely let us know. The other question that came in was around coaching around this work. So if I'm working as an instructional coach on a campus, and I have either been tasked with coaching around this work, or I'm taking it upon myself to coach around this work because I understand the weight and the importance of it. Any tips for beginning these conversations and gently getting into the coaching around this? Because you know it can be difficult and there could be a lot of resistance. I think you did, you know, drop some pretty good tips throughout your presentation today, but just to reiterate and share a little bit of your experience around some of those tough conversations, and maybe getting some momentum going with for the instructional coaches among us.
Yeah, so one thing that I've done is to really, I believe in rooting things in why and how do you know? Like those are two of my favorite coaching questions. And so sometimes a teacher won't really have much of an idea about what reading list they want to do. Sometimes they're passed on. Like when I started teaching, they said, here, Monica, here is what we teach. Here is what we read. Have at it. And so I didn't stray from that because I'm a first year, second year teacher, and these are veterans giving those things to me. So I think as a coach, we have to look for those places where we can sit with the teacher and say, you know, what is it that you hope to teach with this book? Sometimes I've sat with a teacher and they're like, I don't really know. I just someone gave this to me and I sort of like the book, but I don't really know what my students are learning from it. So asking, what's the goal? What's the objective? What are you hoping students will get out of it? And then just going back to my question of, do you think that there's anything that's missing that this book doesn't cover? And so guiding them through the process that I shared, where they just start with the why they're teaching that. Sometimes they don't even know. It's like, yeah, because they told me to. Or, you know, I can change my book list, but I'm really afraid to because I know this has worked 10 years before I got here, right? So just why. And if you think it is really working with students, I always ask, how do you know? Are you bringing in students' voices around it? Are you having conversations? And if not, let's build some of those experiences together. And so I'll guide them in setting up sort of inventories, figuring out what students like to read or want to read. They can do a book tasting, have tables in the room or put desks and have the books out and have students go around and just spend a few minutes, jot down what they think they like about a book, and then settle on a book after sort of thumbing through, but not making those assumptions. And so just really modeling and guiding them through the process of why, how do you know, what have you done to make sure that you know that this is really a positive experience for students.
Great tips. Thank you so much. And I just want to take a minute to shout out the contributions in the chat for book lists. Thank you, Mary and Mercy, for your UNICEF book list and 100 International book list. Great. I will definitely make sure to take those links and check them out and share with our attendees who submitted those questions. So yes, I agree. Fantastic presentation and great resources. Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you to all of you once again for taking time out of your day to join us. This is where you can find Saddleback. If you have a favorite social media platform, we're probably there. No, we are there. So you can find us there. Let us know, connect with us, follow us. We always appreciate your feedback and your conversation. Reach out to us with any questions. And of course, a big thank you for taking time to learn with us today and for sharing resources and coming together, and we just thank you. That's all I can say. We will, oh, Patricia is in love with you, Monica. I will, yes, please follow Monica on social media.
And I'll follow you right back.
I'm telling you,
so much.
we do our best to bring the best here on our platform, and Monica, you fit right in. What can I say?
Thanks for having me. I just saved this whole chat because it is awesome.
It is pretty awesome. Yeah, we have a great audience, no doubt. Yeah. All right, thank you, everybody, and we will see you next week. Thanks, Monica.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Oh, social media. I'll put it in the chat.